Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We welcome you to this installation of the SE Community Conversation Series, where we're dealing with the experience of war and humanitarian response. You're going to really love our session. It's important, pressing, and really some amazing presenters with us. Let me now welcome you, like really everyone's arriving. Let me welcome you to a very, very important session of the SE Community Conversation Series, where we will be dealing with a topic that is so prevalent and so pressing at this moment in history, the experience of war and the humanitarian relief and response efforts. Today's session is not particularly oriented around the armed conflict we currently know is happening in Eastern Europe. However, I imagine it will be part of the conversation today. It's unavoidable. Everyone in the world is impacted by it, similarly to how everyone in the world has been and continues to be impacted by the pandemic. These are very intense times, like really. And something we know at Somatic Experiencing International, which is a trauma resolution organization located headquartered out of Boulder, Colorado, but training therapists and coaches and different kinds of practitioners around the globe in trauma resolution methods founded by Dr. Peter Levine, called Somatic Experiencing. The people in our community are all about being resourced, supported, and well, especially when we're dealing with really like activated topics such as today's. So as we begin our session today, right off the bat, I'll be asking Rabia and Kiana to post some resources in that Q&A channel for you. Resources like Scope, which we have as some exercises to help reset your nervous system. But I want to welcome you to, I think, the biggest resource we have in today's gathering, which is each other. It's each other. So I'm a talking head on a screen right now. Okay, I've done this a few times as a talking head on the screen, but I know you all are there with me because we all care about this material together. And caring alongside other humans is incredibly resourcing. When we know we're not alone or as isolated as we might feel, it makes a difference in how our whole nervous system processes the stressors at hand. So as we get started, right before we bring the panelists online, go ahead and look in that Q&A and read through these locations. See who else is here with us, you guys. These people, Ella in North Dakota, USA is with you. Srinath in the Ukraine, we're here. Jasmina in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Ashley in Canada, Maria in Denmark, Shar in Minneapolis. We are together. So for this hour and a half that we spend, just sit in your chair for a moment, wherever you are, and know that you are in this with Bilbiana in Spain, with Adriana in Toronto, with Misha in California, Maria in North Carolina, Kelly in Nashville, Emeryville, Barbara, I used to live there. That's fun. See, we're related. You guys, we're in one world together, and it's so important that we let ourselves experience that. Now, more important than anything else, I just shared with you, I'm Amie Leigh. I'm the Director of Public Health Initiatives at Somatic Experiencing International. Delighted to host this charitable series for you. But more important than anything else are our guests who are incredible subject matter experts. And I invite Colette, Beth, and Tatiana to join me on screen now, if you would, so that all these people, so Ivana in Toronto can get to know you. Ilana in Encinitas, Colette. Aaron is in New Orleans. Pink is in New Orleans. Got you. Pilar is in Miami. Beth, Tatiana, can you join us on screen? come on screen and turn on your video and meet Suzanne, who's in White Plains, New York, or Nicola, who's in Serbia right now. Tatiana, Serbia is in here with us. What the heck? This is one of the best global conversations. And I know I'm talking too fast for a global conversation. I'm sorry, y'all. Keep working on that. Thank you for joining us, Tatiana, Beth, Colette. We've read your bios. We know all about you. I am a huge fan of you and the work you've done. I feel so blessed that I've gotten to know each of you already for the last several years. This is an unusual conversation today because I already know what you have to offer. But let's let the world know what you have to offer. I'm going to pitch you a question and I'm going to jump off screen. And then anytime you have any exercises or questions or anything you want to do with people, just cue me in and I'll join you, or I might pop on. So here's my question for you. So it's a big one, but it's your whole jam. What is it? Would you introduce yourself to us and you would let us know, what is it that got you connected with humanitarian response and relief, or gave you an understanding of the experience of war?
All right, I'm going to take that first question. Hello, colleagues and friends around the world. You know, I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to trace it back to when I was a little girl. My father was in World War II and participated in D-Day and invasion of Sicily, and then he established an organization to help amputees. So when I was this teeny little girl, I was swimming with amputees. I was wheeling them around, playing wheelchair basketball. And I think it was my first introduction to the effect of war. Then at the age of 21, I found myself in Washington, D.C. at the White House, working on US-Soviet relations, nuclear arms control issues. And for 40 years after that, through various organizations, I've worked on almost every international conflict that you can think of, and then a bunch of humanitarian disasters, including the last ones that I really was involved in: Syria, Ebola, Afghanistan, and the Sahel. So I know that after all of that, you can see that's why my hair is so white and crazy silver. You know, after all of that, I kind of took a look around when I was at US Agency for International Development and realized that all my colleagues were traumatized. So I vowed then to try to help myself and my colleagues to deal with that trauma, and became a somatic experiencing practitioner. And I like to say that, you know, you really can't be in the river dealing with conflict and humanitarian disasters and not get wet. So we're all a little stressed out, a little traumatized. But the good news is that we know how to help ourselves so that we can continue to fight the good fight and help people around the world. So I'm going to turn it over to Tatiana.
Thank you, Beth. Great to hear your story. My story is a little different than yours. I come from the center of the war, actually, that happened in 90s. So I personally experienced Sarajevo under the siege for several months. And that was a really big drive for me to get involved in the humanitarian responses and with the different organizations and see how can I contribute from my own experience with refugees. And what I really like to think of is this funny story that I have from actually being in the middle of the war. There was a moment that happened to somebody. The big bomb grenade fell into a pressure cooker through somebody's apartment, through the window, into the pressure cooker, and never exploded. And one of my friends at that time said, we have to actually sell this to Americans. This would be a great commercial for pressure cookers. It's a funny story for me. Maybe other people cannot relate to that all the way because they don't have that first-hand experience. But it's like, okay, there are Americans out there, they can sell pressure cookers, they're really good in advertising. But what I'm trying to say is that that experience, bomb not exploding, is what got me into how can I get involved into humanitarian response. Like, how can I bring work that's like SC to the region or the other regions in the world so that we don't have these bombs starting exploding. So I think I will stop here. I have many other things to say, but I'll stop here and
Thank
ask
you.
Colette to tell us more.
Thank you, Tatiana, for your story. And I will pick up on Sarajevo as really being the city and the experience that led me into international work. So how I got involved in international work and working in war-affected countries is when I was a federal prosecutor with the US Justice Department. And I was asked to go to Bosnia to work with the Bosnian judiciary as they were navigating how to integrate international human rights standards into their justice system. And this was the first time I'd had exposure to what would be considered a war-affected country. And when I went there, it really struck me as to many things, everything from what you just talked about, Tatiana, the ways that the Bosnians and others had navigated the conflict and some of the humor and the way that they built resilience. But what also struck me is how disconnected those of us who were going to these conflicts were from what was happening. And I would hear statements like, well, they need to rebuild the justice system. Why don't they get over it? Or why are they looking in the past to address some of the things that happened, the wrongs? And I realized that there was something we were missing in these technical approaches of just pass the laws, get things set up, and all of society will heal and get over the war. And it was that experience that I took note in Sarajevo. And then, like Beth, worked in many, many different countries, Libya, been to Ukraine, Kosovo, lived there for a year, and Afghanistan, Iraq. I'd been in all these places. And while I was doing this work, I started to pick up, as Beth said, wait a minute, I'm part of this scenario and I'm not doing very well here. And so this all came together after about 10 years of doing this work. And I started to answer the question, what is going on in the human dimension? What is the underlying issues? And it led me to the somatic experiencing course and becoming an SEP, and then fast forward to today, integrating the knowledge of neurobiology and trauma into my peace building and justice work to marry the human dimension into this. So maybe what we could do before we launch into our conversation with everybody is I'd love to invite everyone who would like to be part of an exercise, and Amie is going to help us kick this off.
That's so great. Yeah, so folks, we'd love to get you on screen to join us for Colette's exercise. We heard where you're calling from. We heard where you're joining from. Can we be with you? Would you be willing to come on screen? If you would be willing to be on screen, please find the raise hand button on your screen. And as you raise it, myself and Dion will be bringing you over with us. Go ahead and you can stay on mute, and then Colette will guide us. Cool. Here they come, folks. All right. We'll probably bring over just like 10 or 12 of us for now. So that's starting to we're seeing them. And as you do come on screen, please go ahead and turn your video on. So we're sending you little messages, and it says to promote you to a panelist, and that just say yes when that prompt comes on, because that's what will bring you over. All right, go ahead and take us away on this, Colette.
Great. So I want to just give a quick intro. This is an exercise that For example, when I talked about integrating it into the work, if I'm doing a dialogue between groups that are in conflict, or I'm doing a training, or I'm doing an interview of a survivor, this is something I might do either myself alone before I start, or if the situation's available to those I'm with, I might invite them to do it with me. And this is something when I talk about integrating knowledge into the work of peace building, this is an example. So what I'd invite you to do, if you would like to, is to just get comfortable in your chair or wherever you're sitting, and to put your feet, if you can, to make contact to the floor, and have your feet flat on the floor, and just feel your feet touching that floor, whatever pressure you want to put between your feet and the floor. And then feeling your back, making contact with your back against the seat, or if there's a pillow there. I have a pillow behind me, I can feel that. And then just to kind of feel your bottom, your hips, your sits bone, everything just kind of sitting on that chair. Just kind of taking just a few seconds to kind of just notice yourself sitting there. And then we're going to do, if you'd like to just do a couple simple movements. Again, it can be done in the car before you're engaging in something that might be a little difficult. You can do it with someone else. I'm just going to invite you to slowly, like in micro movements, to move your head to your right shoulder. Micro movements. Just notice as you're doing that, whatever you might be noticing. I'm noticing that's a little tight. So you might notice something, maybe not. I'm noticing I'm holding my breath. I'm going to let it go. And then I'm just going to invite you to bring your head back up. And then let's just do it to the other side. Whatever side you haven't done, just slow micro movements to the left. What you're noticing. So just breathe. And the last thing we're going to do is real slow semicircle down towards your chin with your head. So it's a micro slow movement of a circle, like a pendulum moving slowly. And letting your head do however low it wants to go, or however it wants to move. Slowly back to the other side. If you'd like to, just let it go back the other side, like the other part of the pendulum. Back to the other side slowly. Noticing, if anything, noticing the tension in my shoulders, releasing a little. And just looking straight ahead again. And just last is just again, feel yourself sitting in that seat, and kind of coming back into your chair. And if you want to just kind of take a look at each of us in our little squares, the little windows. We can wave at each other, and then we can thank everybody for joining us in this.
Thank you for being in that. Gosh, that was really, really great. Like, I think we've done that about 100 times, Colette. And there was something about the slowness that I really got today. Like, I could go into any fitness class and do like, oh, get a good stretch. What I really just got so much was how by doing that slowly, different parts of my body settled. It wasn't like force a good stretch. It was more like get the whole body to settle. Really nice place to start. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
So I am curious, Tatiana, picking up on what you were saying with the kind of humor that you all talked about with the bomb. How did that support that type of interaction with each other? How do you describe that as supporting resilience when you're in the middle of something that could be very dangerous, and worried about yourself and your family in a war environment.
Yes, that's a really good question. You know, when you find yourself in the midst of the armed conflict and the bombs are falling around and the danger comes from the outside and the danger is inside, because in Sarajevo specifically there were also snipers, so you don't know if the sniper will shoot you or the bomb will fall onto your head. People turn to each other. They just try to find refuge in each other, in being together, in actually trying to live the life in a normal way in those kind of circumstances. And that might sound strange to somebody from outside. How do you live a life normally in the midst of the war? But people really, what I have witnessed, people really tried to just go about their daily life in such a circumstances. Like women, they would dress, they would put their makeup, whatever little food people would have, would prepare, share with each other. The region where I come from is known for a good humor. So people like to tell jokes. So they would actually make jokes about really bad stuff happening to them. It's like dark humor, but it worked. It was bringing that later on when I actually learned somatic experiencing. It was very clear to me that it was bringing some kind of resource into the system. So you would have these moments of like releases in the midst of the armed conflict, in the midst of the bombing, in the midst of the chaos. So, oh, okay, I have this laughter with my friend or with the friends. So something like that. I don't know if that answers your question, Colette, but
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because it's interesting because I was remembering living before I understood what, as you described, what was going on with resourcing or supporting each other's nervous system or building relationships to kind of regulate with one another and support each other. It reminded me of those times in Sarajevo and in Kosovo and Pristina with just the laughter and the connection and bringing together, and how that you could feel that the room would feel heavy in the beginning, and then you could sense a shift as people were laughing. And now looking at it from a lens of SE, I think, oh, there was like some co-regulation going in. There was some nervous system action, and I didn't fully understand that, how powerful that was, that engagement piece, the human connection and engagement.
yes. And you know, leaning into each other, holding each other, actually, hugging each other. I witnessed that a lot as well. People will hugging, or something really bad is happening, you know, like sticking together, body to body. So that, you know, I later I understood. So it was this like almost like creating the bigger body to navigate the bigness of that intensity, because there are not even words to describe the intensity when the bomb explodes. I mean, how to describe that? 10 times earthquake? Something like that. So it's intensity. So leaning into each other, hugging, playing games. In the shelters, people were playing games, playing music, having their little parties in the shelters.
That's beautiful.
So, Colette, you mentioned you were working in Kosovo and Sarajevo, but can you tell me a little bit, where were you and was that in 90s, and what were you doing? What was your experience there?
Yeah, and it's interesting because in answering that, I wanted to kind of ask Beth the same question, because when you're talking about this, and when the time I was working there, and there things going on in Pristina, violence, bombs going off at that time, I come back to Beth, and I'm curious, given the work that we do, we sometimes don't address that. And I look at the experience there, me and others who are there, thinking, oh, we're from the outside, we're there to support, we're there to help, not acknowledging until we basically collapse from exhaustion or illness that we're being affected. So I'm curious, Beth, you've done a lot of work on this, what your experience was.
Well, geez, it's so, I think I know for me, and I know for a lot of my colleagues, Sarajevo really, we saw Rwanda and we're like, oh no, never, ever, ever again. And then boom, it was Sarajevo. And a lot of us, I think, were like reborn. We were reborn as people because what we saw and experienced in Sarajevo. And some of it was really beautiful and some of it was really terrible. And maybe that was the first time that I was moving from seeing a Bosnian Muslim woman and a Serb mother, both lost children early in the war, yet they had become best friends. They were each other's support systems. And it was like, that was so amazing to me. Or watching during the war, the US Embassy, the ambassador, and everybody hunkered down in the basement for years, right? And yet they had jokes that they made, and they had songs that they would sing, and they had rituals around candles and things that they would do just to keep their spirits alive, even as they were crying when they were telling us what it was like. It's kind of holding all those emotions at once and trying to ride that wave, right? The new friendships and the feeling of solidarity that you can survive underground for years, but then also dealing with the fact that a neighbor didn't come home, will never come home again. And so it's all that. It's just, and we didn't know about SC then, right? But maybe in some small way throughout these experiences, we're learning in our systems how to hold all that, so that we can live for the next day. I don't know, Tatiana, is that real for you?
I mean, you're really highlighting something very important. I will say it in a different words. So human connection. And in those kind of intense situations, it doesn't matter if you had a friend that you know for 20 years, was actually a young girl at that time. Or if you met somebody and you just knew this person for 5 days. You created this bond with the new person on the same level, like you know this person already for 10 years. Mm. That's incredible. What kind of bonds were formed. And I just want to say, you said, oh, you saw the Muslim and the Serb, they became best friends. I have to say, that kind of division I was not aware of that kind of division before the war. So the mix was already there, and a lot of people, I would say majority of people, were not looking at each other in that way. I'm also curious from both of you, like in other places, what did you see? How did they cope with the intense situations? Like you mentioned, Beth, you were in Rwanda as well, and you collect somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that I think was such a huge revelation to me was from Rwanda, where all of the humanitarians went, they arrived on the ground, and it was chaotic, and everybody was duplicating efforts, and everything was crazy. I mean, it's always crazy. It's crazy on the border right now between Poland and Ukraine. It's crazy in a lot of these places. But the humanitarians actually started organizing themselves in a really profound way. And what I've seen since, the early days of trying to mount this huge effort around a lot of, death and despair and destruction in Rwanda to today, it's almost like we've learned so much, and we've learned so much about really understanding that as a humanitarian, as someone going in to assist, you're not the real deal. The people on the ground are the real deal. And to help them be in the forefront, to help give them not food, not hand them, food in a wrapper, but give them a credit card and load up some money so they can go to a local place and buy some eggs, and start rewarding the local economy. Some of the things that we've seen, recently, of people welcoming, instead of going into a refugee camp, they're welcome into a host community. And maybe they have to run two whole days of school in one day. So students are going in the morning into the early afternoon to the evening. But there's so much to tap into there of local people helping themselves with the assistance of the international humanitarians. But it's really their deal, and watching that evolution, has been so heartwarming for me. I hate that we have to learn that from all these wars, but I think that we have. I don't know. What do you think, Colette? You've seen.
Yeah, what immediately came up for me related to what you said, Beth, and Tatiana, your question, is this strong sense of what I've experienced in many different countries with different cultures, different religions, different wealth of experiences, is that even on the addressing what might be the stress or the trauma or the effect at an individual and collective level of war, the tools or the capacity to navigate that exists there. And I think that sometimes external people come out with a preconceived view of the model or how it should be, but there's already systems in place. Like you mentioned the culture, and it was absolutely this, which was, my background is kind of German and Irish, and I used to say, my Bosnian and Kosovo friends would say, bring your Irish side there, because my German side would be very serious. They come on, bring the Irish side out. And it was just like, but there's war. How can we laugh? They're like, do you want to survive or not? So get with it. And so it was just honoring that and really looking at what exists in the individual, the innate ability to address what is needed for them and to honor that and to really support or walk along and not be some person or, which I think international actors tend to do, is we have the answer. We do not. We have support, and we really need to listen to the people. So that's what came up across the board. There's ways to move forward. Hi, Amie.
Hi, Amie.
Hi. This is a magnificent conversation, you guys. We're 45 minutes in, we're halfway through, and it's beautiful. I mean, if I could just name, hearing your experience is so different than probably the experience of everybody coming. This is what they wanted to hear. They're like, they're in a state of upset. And your experience is telling us this is a time where you're going to cope, you're going to get strengths and learnings and new bonds. I mean, you're turning the paradigm of global armed conflict upside down by bringing your somatic experiencing informed selves to this conversation. I wanted to chime in because I got a question via a text message from someone who's attending who didn't want to put it in the Q&A. And I'll read it to you. It's right in line with what you're saying, but I also want to invite all the attendees, as these questions start to roll in, your questions matter. Are you starting to wonder, why are these humans smiling? I mean, this is a session about war. I don't mean to be dishonorable or disrespectful to the circumstances happening, but you're hearing deep resources. So what resources do you need? I know Colette, Tatiana, and Beth, you guys, you want to give resources, don't you? These guys, they'll talk amongst themselves. You can keep listening. It's a resource. And they want to give you resources. So whatever you want, whatever you need, whatever you are wondering about, put a little question in that Q&A. And when you see other people's questions, put a little thumbs up if it feels like that's yours. So here's the question for you all. I'll read it and then jump off the line. Beth said, humanitarians start to organize themselves. Beth, you and I have talked about this thing too. Humanitarians start to organize themselves. How do I get involved with people organizing themselves? And how do I not get panicked? I'm so panicked and I want to help. And so I'm also going to cue in Rabia, if you could drop some information about the SC Ukraine task force in the chat, that would be great, because we do have SC folks on the ground in lots of places getting involved as a task force. But for this, for all of you, humanitarians start to organize themselves. How do I get involved and not get panicked? I'm so panicked.
Well, this might be a good time if the SC staff could drop in the chat a link to Sphere. Sphere is the kind of Bible for the humanitarian community that has a humanitarian charter that they've all agreed on. And it's also got minimum standards for humanitarian assistance. And getting smart on that would help you understand, how they're organized. And, on the panic side, what I would say is it's a really amazing community of people that work all over the world to pick up and wherever they are and move on to the next disaster or the next war. And the only way that they can work is with the support of local people around the world. And if you want to get involved, they're that panic feeling aside, I mean, it's real, right? But they will help you. They will train you. I've been in a training all week on the new standards for Sphere. I mean, you're never going to be alone. You're always going to be in this community, in this really caring, vibrant community, and they will help you and they will train you. It's over to you guys. I mean, do you have any nuggets on, especially on the panic side?
Just one thing. That's normal. I think it's always going to be, anytime we have to step up to do something like that. There isn't a time. I just got back from a mission a week ago. And even though I've been to the same country back and forth for 16 years, a few days before I left, I was getting butterflies in the stomach and a little nervousness. And so I had to reach into my resources and my, some of the things that we've learned in somatic experiencing to help. It's a normal reaction to something that you're going to be facing. Tatiana.
Yeah, along those lines, I joined Center for Women Victims of War in Croatia when I escaped Sarajevo and worked with them. And that was the best thing that could have happened. So along those lines of the panic, joining the group of people, pretty soon you find yourself actually being helped with that panic as soon as you join that group of people, to work with. That's my 5 cents.
I know you couldn't keep going with that. It's so great. And I'm eavesdropping, kind of thinking about years ago when we were trying to get involved with international disaster relief things, similar experience. Would you all agree that in especially humanitarian and war environments, it's good to align with an existing organization? I know in regular, especially like just natural disaster response, we say like, no disaster cowboys, don't self-engage, don't be the world's savior. There's so many people. And so I know at SCI, we've had an opportunity to connect with our therapeutic practitioners have been invited by Team Rubicon, which is an American-based organization to deploy internationally to help with some of the mental health sides of things. I think International Medical Corps does this. There's quite a few. Maybe you guys know a few others. And specifically, we have another anonymous attendee, so can't bring them on screen either. So hi, anonymous. We're going to chat to you, and everyone else keep asking questions. But they were saying, like, what are some other ways to get involved? Specifically, what are some possible suggested ways to get involved supporting refugees coming into the US at the Mexican border right now? So there's some complexity for you, and wherever you want to go with that.
There's some wonderful organizations in the United States, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, Catholic Relief Services. I mean, almost every religious body has an organization. If you go on to Relief Web, you can actually look country by country, and you can see the different organizations that are involved. And so that'd be a great start for you. One other cool thing just on the humanitarian assistance side is, so they have their sphere, right? They have their code of conduct and their minimum standards. And then there's something called the Interagency Standing Committee, which is hosted by the UN. And it's a cluster system where they have all these different clusters for shelter, for water and sanitation, for healthcare. And there's different international organizations that are part of that cluster. And so if there's something happening in the world, they can say, okay, our immediate needs are shelter, health, whatever. And here are the organizations to go to. So if it's health, we're going to go to International Medical Corps. We're going to go to Doctors Without Borders. And they mobilize those people. So it's pretty well organized, and every one of us has some skill, right? Everybody has something to give. And so if you look at that system and you look at the organizations there, they're always looking for people. And the only thing that I would say is try to get yourself resourced, because you don't want to discover, like Colette and I did 40 years later, that wow, you're really freaking traumatized and you need a lot of help. And so that's why it's so wonderful we're having this conversation, because we know how to resource ourselves now to be able to deal with frankly some of the worst things that this planet has to cough up. So I'm just so glad that I made that journey with Colette and got to know Tatiana and others, because we're all in this together, and we know we have to take care of ourselves before we take care of others. I think that's the most important thing that I've learned in 40 years of doing this.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Beth, that I was thinking two little images popped up in my mind. I feel almost this urgency when crises like this happen, where you can almost feel your body wanting to go move and do something to help. There's this feeling of wanting to help. And so absolutely, it's important that one also pauses and kind of sits with that a little bit and make sure that we individually are also supported ourselves before we leap in. And that is kind of like that airplane, especially because you may get on an airplane where they say put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put on the others. And I think a lot of us in service fields tend to just forget us, throw the mask over here. It's like, but we do that, and then we're not going to be there in the long term. If we're in the long term and want to support, then we have to do that. So thanks for raising that.
Yes, great.
I'm wondering, I know there was a wonderful exercise that you had, Tatiana, that you described. I'm wondering
if it would be a time now to
maybe. What do you think, Amie? Do you think should we do questions, or what do you think?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of questions popping up in the Q&A, and I think it's really because it's marvelous to listen to you. I do have one. Actually, a couple are just starting to come in. But let's go ahead and let's do an exercise, and then we'll take some questions. because that just feels really great. So if you guys would like to come on screen to do another exercise, go ahead and raise your little hands and we will port you over. And I mean, raise your hand in the thing, not just in your own privacy of your room. And when you come over, please turn on your video when it has you do that. While we're waiting for them to come over, I want to just share with the world. Guys, these folks, what you're hearing Tatiana, Beth, and Colette have in common, especially, not only is their profound experience and their affection for each other, but you're hearing them say SE, somatic experiencing. Just for those of you who don't know, this is not intended to be a commercial for SE. This is our charitable nonprofit offering for the world. But SE is a method of resolving trauma using the nervous system. And anybody who works with individuals one-on-one, whether they're a therapist or a coach, perhaps a yoga or a movement teacher, even in the roles of different international responders, emergency responders, it's a really profound resource. So we'd like to thank you for being with us today, and we're going to give you access to a free basics training, which is a 3-hour live training. I apologize, this is such an international audience. It happens on US time frames live. But if you would like that, we'll put some information in the Q&A. You can email us at publichealth@traumahealing.org and we'll get you the code for like the one-time free access. And we'll also share with you in a little bit about our crisis stabilization and safety program, which may be also relevant. And these 3 are incredible facilitators in training and development for that program. And we have some tools that we can share with you. Enough about that. I just wanted to give you your free commercial break as y'all are coming online. Nice to see you. Hi, Sarnath. Hi, Mary. Hi, Zoe. Hi, Nicola. Hi, Barbara. Hi, Claire. Thank you for being here. It's just so cool. Take it away, Tatiana.
Hey, how about we raise our hands and start to shake the hands and just pay attention. How do you feel? A little bit of that shaking just in the hands, and then slowly drop down and pay attention to your feet. Connection of your feet with the ground and all the places of the connection with the ground. And now bring your attention back again to your arms and hands and notice how are they feeling right now. And then we're gonna do again one more cycle of that. So we're shaking the hands, we're sensing quite intense energy in the hands. Well, when we are shaking, it's intense. Okay, well, I can sense that intensity, but just in one part of my body, in my hands. And you stop. Notice the sensations in your hands, arms. Lower your hands down. And again, bring your attention back to your feet. Notice the connection with the ground. All the little places where feet are connecting with the ground. And now gently and really slowly bring your feet up, spreading your toes, sensing the heels touching the floor. And as you are spreading the toes, slowly start to bring your feet down as almost like you are grabbing a cloth. Like you are, imagine that you're grabbing a cloth. So your feet is going up into the air. The heel is on the floor, spreading the toes, and then gently putting the feet down, grabbing tissue or the cloth from the floor going up. And just do that few times. It looks like this. Do that really slowly, really gently. And notice what might begin to happen to you right now. And what might be a little bit different right now. Amie, what are you sensing?
Yeah. I really got something, Tatiana, from you naming like that we were putting intensity in one place, you know, like instead of it being everywhere, you gave me one place.
Yes.
And that exercise gave me permission to have it there. And then it didn't make me keep it. Like, you know, there was a point where I'm like, oh, I just want to put my hands down. Like I'm just done holding it there. So it was like you kept giving me permission to get some intensity and get it out, and get some intensity and get it out. That's how that one
That's right.
was working for me. Because, you know, we can get so mobilized and flat that you want some intensity, or at least to contain or direct. It was really, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's good, right? It's thank you for seeing.
Yeah, it was really powerful. I just got off a call with fellow Ukrainians who were mobilizing humanitarian support. So I was very charged. It was very emotionally charged, and I had kept that tension through my dinner. I couldn't lose it. Then I feel that it's all releasing now. So thank you.
Great. That's awesome. That's exactly for that, you know. So that kind of intensity, as you said, Amie, we putting it in one place, we having that permission to do it all of it over there, and then slowly releasing it. And with the feet, it's really grounding and sensing that support of the gravity of the earth beneath us.
Thank you for being willing to come on screen for Tatiana to lead that and for sharing that, Srinath. That was awesome. We'll send you back over to the panelists or to the attendee spot. Please keep asking questions, please. Folks, look at these beautiful humans on the screen. This is Who Cares, like you do. We're in this together. Not one of us is alone on this planet, despite that feeling of I'm alone. It's up to me. I'm the only one on this call. Whoever, you know, you're not. So I want to mention to you another resource before we bring in another question on, which is just this crisis stabilization and safety program. It is a project that has been in development at SE International for several years, and it continues to be in development. We've had a few test audiences with Indigenous communities in the United States and with first responder groups. We were able to share it with the United Nations NGO Committee on Mental Health, and with FEMA's Higher Ed Institute, and people are enjoying what's there, and it's still in development. These beautiful 3 humans who are with us are helping the development. They've been with it from the beginning, and we're anxious to get it out, and it's still in development. But one thing we do have that's currently available is we have the SCOPE resource tool. That's one of an array of tools in the Crisis Stabilization and Safety Program. So I'll be sharing it in the chat. We're experimenting with how we get documents over to you. I want you to have that as a little document. You could screen click it, or Rabia also earlier gave you a link to it. We'll also give you a link to learn more about CSS, to learn more about the program, or potentially learn more about facilitating the program. So we'll share another link to a form. We're just sharing stuff over there. We're just sharing because sharing is caring. And why don't you share more questions with us? And that's where we're going to go from here. We've got some good questions, guys. 2 have been up to the most. And so I'm going to take the one that's at the top of my screen, which is, and I'm sure I'm saying your name wrong, and I apologize, but Liana or Rosa, I'd love to bring you over here to go ahead and ask your question because it's so appropriate for these three panelists. So if you could raise your hand, there we go. We're going to port you over. And you'll come off mute and go ahead and ask your question.
Is it working? It's working.
Yes, welcome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leigh. I am a what I call recovering humanitarian. I worked many years in the field in the Middle East and the Caribbean with mass migration, so refugee response. And as I'm easing my way back into working in humanitarian aid, I find that the way in which we operate, the way in which we provide assistance is, as you've all shared in different ways, extremely dysregulating. And I find that the concepts of SE are almost inaccessible to colleagues because they are so dysregulated. It seems like it's not even something that they're able to consider, that they're able to process. And so curious if you have any recommendations on an entry point in which to introduce some of this so that our work doesn't continue to dysregulate us, particularly for colleagues who are in the field, who are working with beneficiaries on a daily basis.
One thing, I mean, Beth, this is directly her field, and so I want to turn it to her for more in-depth answer. One thing I wanted to say is I think there's a lot that can be done with how we hold ourselves. So both Beth and I have worked in environments that are exactly as you described. And so we can't make or force anything because we are all at wherever our nervous system is and what we can tolerate. And so at a minimum, what can be done, there are a few things. One is how we might prepare our own nervous system and how we are and how we just focus on how we can regulate ourselves, because what we do know is that we can have an effect on those around us just purely by our presence and our nervous system, given how we ping off of each other. You know, how you go into a room and you feel the tension or you feel things. So that's the first thing. And the other is the extent possible, how we can try as best as we can to not get pulled into the vortex of the spinning that happens, as I call it, the spin cycle of the brain. Like we're walking around as humanitarian and, you know, aid workers with just heads, but drop into our body and do some exercises, slow things down, take a step back. These may sound simple, but they could be very powerful. I think it's that type of an approach. And then sometimes I've had colleagues who will notice and have a question that something shifted and they might be curious, and then there's an opening. Or another thing, the last thing I'll say is when I've run dialogues or meetings or staff meetings, I might do where I just slow it down in the beginning, especially if I'm leading the staff meeting. And I might, even though some of the groups I work with will not want to do, you know, they would roll their eyes at any exercise. It doesn't mean I can't just stop for a moment and just have a pause before we start. But I can do the pacing of the staff meeting a little bit more slowly. Little tiny things to provide ease in that space can be supportive. I'll turn it to Beth.
Wow, I'm like, you must be doing a mind meld with me, Liana, because as I'm thinking about our conversation and I'm thinking we're trying to find like what is the light in these complex crises, right? How can we keep us moving along and surviving, right? But the fact of the matter is most of the humanitarians that I know, they're really frozen. They're profoundly frozen. And this concept of freeze that you know, I feel so grateful to have learned this in the somatic experiencing training. I never even heard of it before. But then I looked around and I realized, yes, there's a part of your nervous system where you go into this overwhelm and you become frozen. And when you become frozen, you can't be curious. You can't be frozen and be curious. And so what you're talking about is this lack of curiosity. We can't even get our colleagues and the beneficiaries, the victims, and the people that are experiencing the crisis, they're not even present. They're not here. So they can't be curious about SE. They can't be curious about how I can shift my nervous system. So we have to help them come out of that freeze by doing, if they're willing, but first of all, naming it's a freeze. You're frozen. Okay, you're getting up and you're going to work, but you're functionally frozen, right? So naming that, I think that's really empowering for people. And then helping them to come out of a freeze, moving their arms, things that Tatiana was doing, getting up and walking and just trying to get in their body and really start to feel. And then to help guiding people through that feeling process by helping them understand, once they're out of that frozen state, what's happening in their body, and giving them the tools to be able to stay there and not go into that overwhelmed state. But from where I sit and what I've seen, I would guess that the majority of people in this field are really frozen. And so we have to help them get out of that freeze. But yeah, you're right on. You got it.
Thank you.
I have nothing to add. For that, I organized the whole training and brought to the region where I'm from, just because of this, what you are asking and saying. That was the only answer for me. The answer was, okay, bring the whole training there, get the people trained, they go through the process, and then they can go out there into the field and work.
Is there data, or are there studies on humanitarian agencies in particular that show the positive impacts? Because I feel like part of it is there's a lot of resistance because there are so many different modalities. So curious if there's any information, case studies that we can bring forward to our welfare unit and say, this has been working for other agencies. Can we fund some programming for ourselves?
That's a really great question. I'll take that a little bit from the SE International perspective. We do have a link on our webpage that is, it's resources, and it takes you to an abundance of journal entries about the efficacy and evidence supporting the value of somatic experiencing. Mm-hmm. I believe there's several that are in relation to war and also in relation to disaster responses and things that may have some parallels.
The Israeli one, right?
Well, yeah. And so we have a research committee right now going on, working with the IDF, using somatic experiencing with the IDF. They did their first round of clinical trials and testing. So that has us as an emerging evidence-based practice. And then in Turkey, they also used some adaptations, some stabilization adaptations, and collected a lot of data. So why don't you particularly email us at publichealth@traumahealing.org, and Kiana and Rabia will dig up some of that for you to support you. And anyone else, if you really need that, go ahead and reach out to us, because we'd like to connect you to the research that's growing. And we need more people who are doing their PhDs who want to use or collect data sets to help us build that, right? So it's so important what you're asking.
And there's
the amazing thing is that the military, the US military, the National Guard, I'm thinking of in particular, they used to just do cognitive therapy, talk therapy, and then hand out drugs, right, to the servicemen and women who've served. They now use somatic-based approaches for helping people, massage, acupuncture. I mean, they've expanded their entire toolkit more because the cognitive therapy and drugs didn't dent suicide rates or alcohol abuse or divorce or anything in the force, right? But they saw these other things that were happening, and they decided, well, maybe we got to try these things. And so that's where you find the openness and these, they're not necessarily new tools, but these different approaches being offered. And so, SEI is really trying to track a lot of that. But this is all evolving. It's all evolving right in front of us.
And there's also, it made me remember that there's also the side of just straight out the neurobiology of stress, chronic stress, and the stress response. There's a lot of research around that. And so oftentimes when I have discussed it with colleagues, there's certain things one needs to approach a group in the language and things that make sense to them, that feels comfortable and safer to them. And sometimes the entryway of just how the brain and body works and how stress interferes with our ability to problem solve, and resolve conflict, and how certain processes of our brain makes it more difficult for us to have creative thought. That's like, that's interesting. Just that awareness oftentimes can be helpful. And there's, the crisis stabilization and safety training that Amie mentioned talks about that aspect, because that's something we can relate to. And I think with colleagues in my field, that's something like, okay, I get that. I see that.
Thank you so much.
I really love that. And I got a little goosebumps from both you guys were sharing, and it kind of shouted out to you in a way, Tatiana, because it's like the things, I'm going to use an expression that means something in English, and it may not translate and not English. So I apologize in advance, but it's like, it's a no-brainer that massage is going to make you better at doing your job. Like, what I mean is, somebody does something to really take care of their body, they come out and they're like, oh, I just feel better. I have more. That's literally the definition of resilience and capacity building. I feel better. I'm more capable to do my job. So some of these more in SE training, we actually involve therapists and coaches together with body workers, because sometimes, like what you're finding, making that very intellectual, analytical case can get tricky. It's necessary and can get tricky. But if you can say, like, just be quiet for 5 minutes and let me just massage your neck for a moment. They're like, yeah, that's better. Okay. Well, that's somatic. That's a form of somatic. We work with first responders quite a bit. I run a nonprofit disaster relief organization, and we bring massage clinics into crisis responses. And we always work with first responders who say, I've never had a massage in my life. And why am I so much better now? And how do I do this more often? So we're really, as a human race, on the cusp of learning how important an embodied, healed presence makes in any effort. So a really kudos to you for trying to bring that, and good luck with your recovery. And may I also prescribe some more massage for your recovery and some dance, some Tatiana dance therapy, or, have some fun. Thank you for joining us. We also have another person who has a great question. If we could bring over John Riley, I'd love for him to pose his question to you guys. It's so rich that that folks are bringing themselves. Thank you for interacting so profoundly with these questions. Everything you have to say is so important. And I'm maybe just rambling while I'm trying to get them on screen. Hi, John, welcome.
Okay. Did that work? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. So some years ago, I read a very, some of you may have read it, a very profoundly moving book for me. Was called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, written by Chris Hedges, who was a former war correspondent for the New York Times. And I was really quite moved by his book. And he really outlined from all of his time, which I think he spent time during the former Yugoslavia conflicts, and really unveiled, the process by which powerful elites in a community can manipulate and create the notion of enemy, and then mobilize a large population to annihilate and destroy and kill, right, in the name of their cause. And the damage, of course, done by that, which we're seeing today, right now, we're witnessing, and we've witnessed so many times in so many places, and so many of you have witnessed this directly or witnessed the damage done. And as I think about today, doing my practice, wanting to work with people, of course, there's going to be a tendency for them to want to identify enemy, the threat, right? And to personify it into the people that perpetrated this violence through warfare. But that process thereby then just creating the seeds for further conflict and further warfare between and among groups. And so in doing my practice, I'm thinking about how do I work with people to support them in regulating their nervous systems, hearing and listening to them, and also, supporting them in addressing the terrible threat that they faced and or still face. But also not opting into this culture we have of defining enemies and then mobilizing to kill one another. And I'm curious about, especially those of you who've had such great experiences internationally, it's about helping also undo the culture, right? Not just supporting the individual to change and find healing and health, but also helping support to heal our culture. What are your thoughts?
John, wow, that was such a profound question. And I wanted to just address one piece of it, which is something that is an area that, because of the experience in Bosnia, seeing what happened there and how political leaders could pick at wounds and stoke fears to divide people. And you see that being done through millennia. You see that being done in the United States. And then how, as you mentioned, how that can start violence. We see cycles of violence. There are a couple of resources I want to mention. So a few years ago, because of this question, trying to figure out as a peace builder, okay, we studied the trauma part, but that's a piece of it, and trying to understand, what is this us versus them? What is this dehumanization? What are these things within the brain and the nervous system that allows our system and the humans to kind of get pulled into this and embed these narratives that could become, at best, divisive against communities, but worse, could stoke violence. And so there's two resources. One, it's www.neuropeace.org. It's an open source online journal that we put together with a group of neuroscientists and peace builders that talked about things like intergenerational trauma. So it's the trauma that gets passed along generations genetically, and talked about the us versus them, the dehumanization, how this happens in a neuroscience. That's one. And then the other one is the Think Peace podcast, where neuroscientists and peace builders, Think Peace podcast, are, talk about these issues. So I just wanted to say, there's also an educational piece, just like when practitioners do a psychoeducational piece about things are happening. I think sometimes it's helpful for us to understand what might be some of the neurobiological human wiring and our interaction with from childhood on that might feed into this, and how others can stoke it. And then how do we help inoculate ourselves, support, as if you're a practitioner, support clients to try to inoculate selves to not be pulled into like disinformation campaigns or things like that when the system gets pulled into it. So I think one is just to kind of look at this and to try to understand it in that way. But maybe Tatiana, I mean, you lived this and how this was being used to turn people, like you said, who before you didn't even know who was of certain religions. You were just all Bosnians and Yugoslavs, and then it was used over time, like a slow drip to create divisions.
Yes, it's a very complex topic, actually. Very complex topic. Because it's not only related to that particular region. There are also other influences that have happened and They had other geopolitical interests for that war to happen too. So, but we're not gonna go into that right now. So, well, I mean, I can only speak from my personal experience. I mean, seeing that, the way how I dealt with that is to organize the nonprofit and brought the SC work into the region to actually break the cycles of violence through the centuries. I have seen also a lot of togetherness, but that it has not been given the chance to that togetherness. It was not supported in a proper way because of all these other forces that Colette, you mentioned and you talked right now, you know, from the neurobiological aspect. So these forces, they never had a chance to complete through centuries. So they just keep on repeating. They're self-perpetuating. So they have to have a chance to be completed. But how do we start with that? But we have to start from the individual into collective. So that would be my response to your question, to your complex question.
Very complex.
I'm
One of
also,
the
I'm also,
questions.
yeah, and I'm also moved by the work of Marshall Rosenberg, if anybody's
Yes.
familiar with his work, Nonviolent Communication,
Yes.
to use his work and his ways of engaging people to, especially those who have believed that they were enemies to one another, to begin to see one another as humans first and not as an enemy first. And my wish right now is that the world doesn't turn against the Russian people. Right, the Russian people are being, and I'm hearing it far too often, the Russians have. It's like, well, no, the Russian military has. No, the Russian military under the command of Putin has. You know, like, I want to keep saying that over and over again because I don't know that the Russian people themselves really want this horror to be perpetrated, right? So, and how do I not give in to that narrative, right? Because I catch myself sometimes, you know, myself. Giving into getting angry and feeling frustrated, you know, and not wanting to blame human beings, but also to look at what is driving those humans towards these objectives, and then how do we help heal them from having played a role, even those Russian soldiers. I think of them every morning, and I think, oh my God, if we could just fill their hearts with love and compassion to put their arms down, this whole thing would end. You know, but I know that's crazy, you know, dream thinking, but you know, that there's also a grain of truth in it, right? And we know that from our work as somatic practitioners, right?
Absolutely. We know the power of language.
Yeah.
We know its impact on the nervous system and responses of others. And we know how, as we talk about neuroscience, how it can drive us, as you mentioned, to these impulses of us versus them, or then to kind of not like the whole group of people. We all do that. It's like being mindful and trying to be mindful of that, and it's a challenge. You're absolutely right, but it's so necessary if we're going to stop the cycles of violence or expansion of violence of whole groups.
And I think this is way too much to discuss in the short time that we have left, but there is in these contexts of these conflicts, you know, you talk about retributive justice and restorative justice, and Colette could teach this at a PhD level. But you know, just trying to understand how we want to tag the enemy, we want to get the enemy, we want to put them behind bars, we want to kill them, or whatever it is, that feeling that we have. Well, there's also this other piece, this restorative justice piece, where it's making peace with our enemies, making peace with the perpetrators, being able to dialogue with the perpetrators, and other forms of people being able to actually come to terms with what happened in a way that's not, you know, it's not retributive, it's not punishment, but more acceptance. It requires a lot It requires a lot of groundwork. But it's important for us to recognize that has happened around the world with great effect. And I think we can learn from that.
Okay. Thank you so much, all of you.
Really, and
Thank you for the work you're doing. It's amazing.
If I can just add, we need to have a spaces for restorative justice, build up spaces for restorative justice.
beautiful.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I do want to add just one quick thing related to that, because it's, and how do we build up a restorative justice framework that can hold the container of pain and accountability for transgressions or repair? So there's lots of these layers of how does one do that, rather than a binary where I was working a few weeks ago. There became a binary of either absolute prosecutions or impunity, and trying to open that aperture between what about reparations? What about all of these things in the spaces in between, restorative justice, humanizing? Because if we're going to move forward as conflict transformation, these are important. At the same time, we can't use them to steamroll the injustices and systemic issues in society that are creating conflict and leading to injustices or discriminations. There's so many factors in here, but it comes from looking at how do we transform, and this is where trauma is absolutely a piece of it within these bigger pieces.
And you guys, John, your question is literally transforming the planet. Like asking the question, showing up with the curiosity, inspiring the dialogue. I can just feel it right now, and like the resonance of the whole space of everyone who's intending. And this is a weird thing, but in an SE sort of concept, the coherence of the resonance farther out than we can even imagine, like the future of this session, which is being recorded. Like, let's imagine, anyone experiencing existential threats 3 years from now will realize, like, wait, we're all in this together. We're in time in our own experiences, and we're also just really here making a place inside of ourselves for these restorative justices, for this, making a space inside of ourselves for these curiosities and these questions and these connections. You just really brought so much heart in that. I want to acknowledge and thank you for that. And then we are going to port you back over to the attendee side. Thank you for bringing that dialogue. And folks, we are towards the end. However, wait, don't jump off the line yet if you're thinking about it. More than ever, I think we should keep going for another 15 minutes if we can, because at this moment in history, this conversation is so important. We just got that from John's questions, from your responses, but also from the timelessness of this inquiry. I need to put on the map, Phyllis mentioned it. We had a session with Dr. Peter Levine and Dr. Abby Blakesley on Saturday, a sort of special edition SE Community Conversations that will also be up soon. I think the link is in there so you can watch it, and you can hear what Dr. Levine and Abby had to say, what Peter and Abby had to say about working with children. So many cool topics came up that can be resourceful and supportive. Tatiana, Beth, Colette, would you be willing to stay on for another 15 minutes and just keep letting these gems flow, because everything coming out of you is just really wonderful right now?
Sure.
Yeah, we have a little yes, because there's some more questions in the chat too, and they're great. I think they're important, and yeah, so we're good to keep going. Good. Unfortunately, they're anonymously, not unfortunately. Thank you for posting them. We love your engagement, but they are anonymous. So I'm going to read the question for you, which I know I'll try to bring it to life. I wonder if the panel members, and this, by the way, this got more upvoted than any question that's been asked so far. I wonder if the panel members have any thoughts on how to share information on social media about the Ukraine war in the most optimal way. I would hope that people, when ingesting updates, would be moved to support humanitarian efforts and remain engaged. But the painful information can also cause people to shut down, tune out, move on, etc. Kind of that freeze you were talking about earlier, Beth, right? How would you recommend sharing information and balance it in such a way so as to affect the most optimal engagement from people who'd like to help during a time of crisis? It's important, right? People want to talk about it, but they're where people tune them out.
Yeah, and it made me think. I was talking with a family member and they were consuming a lot of it. And they were saying they feel that it's an imperative, a moral imperative as a citizen of the world to bear witness. And I had to say, because of my experience and what I've already witnessed, it's not helpful to me to see images or to hear graphic. I have to shut that out because it will then put me in a state where I can't, where it's has a counter effect to me. And so I've thought a lot about this, and I thought this is challenging because everybody has different ways of processing, have different responses to news. And it's a very challenging thing. I guess one thing I would just say, that the word that comes up, and I don't know how helpful this is just to take care in how one shares. And in the trauma kind of informed way of visual things can have a counter effect. When I was working in one country, the victims understandably wanted to show the perpetrators what had happened in the world community, and it was very graphic. And I was there. And so we talked about it and how it could be showed in a way that wasn't so indirect that could shut people down or cause all sorts of things, but in a way that could be heard. And so they worked on the language, they worked on how they were going to discuss it so it could be heard. So I guess it comes back to what is the intent, and then how best you get that intent made. And some things can be helpful and some things may make people shut out.
Yeah. Wow, this is like the most profound issue we face, right? It's this, how do we bear witness? How do we make sure that what's happening isn't buried? I mean, right now there's Ukraine, and then, but Yemen's off the front page, and so is South Sudan, and so is what's happening in Afghanistan. And so, this is really such a profound question for us. How do we continue to bear witness so that we can act? Because we can only act if we know what's going on. But then if by bearing witness we're shutting down and we can't act, it's like this really bad conundrum, right? And I know that, like, on Afghanistan, for example, after the events of last summer, there was a group that was created on Facebook. And the idea of that group was just to share information about how can you help? How do you get people out? How do you get people? It was all about help. And it wasn't about the day-to-day of what atrocities were unfolding. And so there are some efforts in that regard, but I don't think that we have that kind of code of conduct around all the different ways that we're accessing social media, and maybe that's what the humanitarians and media organizations and the social media titans need to have some big discussions about this. Because it's profoundly dysregulating to even those that are trying to help. And I don't have answers for you, but I think it is a huge issue and a huge problem, and it needs to have a huge discussion around it with all of the relevant players. So I thank you for raising it. I'm sorry I don't have more to offer on that. But I don't know, Tatiana, you've lived this, maybe.
Yeah, but not the social media was not at that time. The social media really exploded in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So I really don't have any special things that I can say about the social media stuff. Yeah. I mean, except that it can be so dysregulating and misinformative at some points, and there is so much. I agree with you, but there has to be so much discussion created around that and see how to go about that. But I don't have anything smart to say on that.
I have something goofy to add. I was just thinking, like, in disaster spaces, we tell people the best disaster relief, like social media, to get some like healing when you're looking around and everything looks like a bomb was just dropped off, is Pinterest. We say, like, go start
Yeah.
looking at pretty pictures of beaches or whatever floats your boat. Maybe you want to look at little plants, whatever you want to look at. And you just get this endless flood of like beautiful images that are inside what you're interested in. It's like, how can you, so then in this, I was like, how could you post something that simultaneously presents the reality, but then balances with resourcing, and says, like, I know this is rough, so I also want to offer you a resource or an optimism or something exciting, going back and forth and acknowledging both, and, holding all kind of increases the containment. But guys, we're getting close to the end. And sorry, that was just my goofy add in. We're getting close to the end of our time. There is another question, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, we may have another exercise that we'd like to do. So I was thinking, Beth, do you want to do another exercise?
Yeah, well, it's just perfect to launch off of this issue that was just raised, because how do we bear witness and even bear witness when we are ourselves victimized in these situations?
I'm going to interrupt to say, while Beth is talking, raise your hand if we can port you over, and she'll be explaining this, but we'll bring you over to do the exercise with us. Let us be with you for just a couple more minutes. Come on over.
So I like to think that because I'm a huge consumer of social media and news, and every day I start with trying to figure out what is the ground truth on Ukraine. It's profoundly destabilizing. My stomach gets in an uproar. I don't know why, but I do it. Well, I know why, but so I like to think I have this U.S. Institute of Peace backpack, right, with me. It's kind of tattered, but I like to think of this backpack and the kind of the tools that I can put in it when I'm going, so I can carry it with me. And so I like to do this exercise with you guys and think of it about as like just having these little tools, or little arrows in your quiver. As we know, and as we've learned, if we really think about our whole system, we are constantly receiving information, right? We're constantly scanning. We might be really nice just so we're looking out and trying to scan and see what's happening, or we might be in a very defensive position and we're scanning and we're trying to figure out what's bad and what's happening out there. But this concept of orienting, of our brain is constantly taking in this information, and we take it in a lot of the times through our senses, right? Through sight, through smell, through touch, through sound. And all of those can be horrible when you're in these kind of situations. But I would like to try to help us to actually bring on some tools of resilience so that we can look at these situations and become more regulated. So the first would be, if you just think about sight and what you see and images that come to mind, I'd like to think of, what is the last thing that you saw that made you smile? And if you can think about that last thing, again, that you saw, and take that image and close your eyes and just think about in the body, where is that image? Where are you holding it? What does it look like inside? And just sit with it for a minute. And if you want to put some of those images in the chat, I have a go-to image myself. But really try to give it some characteristics. Color is it? What shape? Is it round? Is it a square? get really close to that image. And then if we go to another sense below the eyes, we think about smell. We all have probably things that we have smelled that just are, remind us of the best things about childhood, or walking into some kitchen, or a grandmother's recipe for something. What is that? What is that smell? Where is it? Where are you feeling that smell? Is it filling up your whole body? Is it just in one place? How strong is it? Can you put it in a little box and put a ribbon around it and throw it in your backpack so that you have it when you're looking at other images that are not so, or other smells that are not so friendly? And then how about our ears? So connected to our brain and our eyes. What's the last thing that you heard that really just made you just laugh out loud? And sit with that. And then I like to put that in a little box and tie a bow around it, throw it in my backpack. And then how about touch? We talked about people coming together and holding themselves. We've held each other. We've held ourselves in this workshop today, our conversation. Can you think of something you touched recently that just made you feel so good? Can you feel it? Can you imagine it? Can you sit with that? And then can you tie a bow around that and keep it? Keep it with you. I just want to invite you to slowly open your eyes. How did that land for you guys?
And I just say, Beth, I think it's important that everybody reflect on how it landed, but we are also at time.
Okay.
So let Beth's methodical, deep, lovely guiding voice sit with you as you just notice for yourself, everyone who was here. How did it land? And just have that as we wrap up our session. Let yourself have all of your senses. Thank you, Mary, Jasmina, Barbara, for joining us on screen.
Can I say something?
Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
There was something, Beth, thank you so much for that. There was something that came to my mind I wanted to share with everyone. Years ago, I got to go to a retreat with mental health workers with Thich Nhat Hanh. And one of the things that he said to us as a group is he said, for every hour of suffering we witness, we need to witness an hour of beauty. And that has stayed with me. And I went, well, I'm not always going to be able to do that, but I can have beauty all over my office, you know, in terms of beautiful pictures and images of my family and friends and just fragrances and flowers. And I just wanted to pass that on because that's what also came to mind with this process that you guided us through, Beth. Thank you. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Barbara, that's so great. Sounds like Thich Nhat Hanh and you are aspiring SE practitioners because that's our world. And obviously this mystical evolution of our being. Thank you. Your smile is radiant. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And okay, folks, we have come to time. So sometimes when we've come this far, in fact, we're past time significantly. So let me say, does one of you, and this is always tricky, can one of you lead us out with, you know, there's an answer, there's a question in the chat, and I think it's a good question that we can close with. And it's a good question we can close with. And it's something about, has your work made you more optimistic or more pessimistic about humanity? Now that's me boiling it down pretty slim. But I just thought all of you smiled even hearing that question. So who's got the best to share about, as pithy as possible, because everybody wants more, but we do have to close, about how this line of work has left you, or this experience of war? Tatiana, I see you're like, whoa.
Optimistic.
Yeah.
So much strength, wisdom, connections, expansion, beauty in a positive way. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
That makes me cry.
It does.
It really is.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Tatiana. We're all standing in that. We stand in Beth. You brought us to our senses so we could stand in that exuberance, that like to be an actual resource to other human beings doesn't have to give you compassion, fatigue, drain, pessimism, or miserableness. Like you all are such an example to us that you can, when you're a resource to other human beings, while also deeply grounded in yourself and this kind of somatic neuro-balancing work, you just have so much more to give, and your presence is so much brighter. So thank you for giving us your bright presence over these last couple of hours. It's been really exceptional to be with you. Huge gratitude and shout out to our colleagues in Eastern Europe. Many of us have friends, family, folks who are affected by the dislocation experience and a little disorientation, but may we all be enjoined together in our united hearts, minds, and will to bring health and wellness, hope and resilience into this conversation. Thank you for joining us today. We do have these sessions every month. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, all of the things. But stay tuned, second Friday of every month. And if you're someone who would like to speak at them, email us at publichealth@traumahealing.org, and we'll share you a link to become a speaker in these series. Beth, Tatiana, Colette, beyond grateful for you. Thank you for being with us today. And thank you, everybody in the gathering and all the tech behind the scenes who made it work.
Yes.
Thank you.